Part of our programme of reintroducing Gary from the Reg Desk to the main programme is our talk now on Moon Rovers. So, ladies and gentlemen, and Dave, Gary.
So, recently, there's been a heavy spate of missions to the moon. If you've been keeping track of the moon, of the news, and a lot of them have had moon rovers. So I had a flurry of people. All right, one person, he's just buggered off as well, which is really irritating. Somebody asked me to do a talk about moon rovers. I'm not going to focus on the Apollo ones. I'm talking about the remote control Lunar Rovers. So this isn't a new trend, by the way. During the space race, before the astronauts landed on the moon, the Russians were way ahead of everybody. Pretty much, the Russians won every milestone in the in the Russian-American space race, apart from landing a man on the moon. Specifically, we're going to talk about Lunar Cod, February 1969. See if this works. Oh, there we go. So, Lunar Cod landed. The laser's not working, Dave.
It should do, if you're pressing the right button.
The L?
No.
I'll use mine. You said it.
It's the star.
It's the star. Yes, it is. So, Lunar Cod landed on the moon, February 1969. Well, it was supposed to. So that's not actually where it landed. Lunar Cod, the original one, spectacularly blew up on launch. Yeah, within a few seconds, the rocket went up and boom. Russians never talked about that because they didn't like to spread their dirty laundry around. Whereas the Americans, everything was on film and everybody saw it. And as we know, the Russian space missions ground to a halt, mostly because people died and politics and things like that. But 1970, 17th of November, Luna 17 landed here in the Sea of Rains with Lunar Cod 1. And I'll show you what it looks like. Hopefully. Okay. That's it. That's what landed. Lunar Cod 1. It basically looks like a bathtub on. When Lunar Cod blew up, by the way, in order to survive the lunar nights, because these were all powered by solar panels, but only worked really during the day, followed the battery up, and 2 weeks of lunar night, they had a small nuclear reactor in. So when Lunar Cod blew up, it spread radioactive material all over the area around the launch site. That was fun. But this was the first remotely controlled rover on the moon. In fact, it was the first remotely controlled rover on any extraterrestrial body. Nice solar panel that flips open, pootles around. It was a scientific tool. By then, the Russians realised the Americans have gone to the moon. We're not interested in rocks. We do proper science that the Americans not doing, yes? So they fitted a radio antenna. Very nice, very subtle. They fit a spectrometer to analyse the rocks, an X-ray telescope, a cosmic ray detector to detect all the cosmic rays flying around, and a laser reflector. So somewhere on there is a reflector that is designed for us to fire lasers from the Earth to the moon and back again. Originally, it was intended to go for 3 lunar days. A lunar day is about 14 days. So you have 14 days, you go to sleep for 14 days, approximately, you wake up and go on. 3 lunar days, which is about 3 months in reality. It ran for 11 months. It covered about 10.5 kilometres. And during that time, it took 20,000 TV images, 206 high-resolution panorama photographs, took 25 soil samples, and did experiments at 500 different locations.
Busy little bee.
Busy little bit. I say this is a success. This is very successful, definitely better than Lunar Cod 0. It lasted until 1971. It is still being used today. We are still sending lasers to the moon. The Apollo missions, most of the Apollo landing missions, took laser reflectors. Boxes, about yay big, designed to fire a laser, reflect it back. Turns out, Lunar Cod 1, there's a mission called Apollo. It's a different acronym, but it's all about sending a laser and getting the... Lunar Cod 1, they got better reflections from that than they have from the Apollo ones. We are using this to understand the moon's orbit and its distance, and predicting these things to within a few centimetres, which for me I think is unbelievable. When you're firing a laser at the moon and you've got that. We now know, because of this and the Apollo ones, the moon is moving away at about 4 centimetres a year. So slowly moving away. In a small amount of time, astronomically speaking, about 600 million years, we will no longer get total solar eclipses.
I don't think we need to worry about it.
No. Well, I'm planning on living forever, so...
All we need now is a nuclear
or die trying.
to finish the job.
But in 600 million years.
Years, yeah.
Yeah. If anybody saw the news about the annual eclipse that happened recently, which is very rare, that's what total eclipses will become. The moon will be so far away you'll no longer get a complete occultation, they call it. But they're still doing this. They're still firing these lasers, still analysing. Off the back of the success, on the 15th of January, 1973, Luna 21 sent up Lunar Cod 2. That was also a success. A more advanced version. Let me show you it. There you go. It looks similar, but it's a little more advanced in the technology side. It ran for 4 months and covered 39 kilometres. In addition to all the images that it took, it did solar X-ray experiments, visible and ultraviolet light levels, the local magnetic field, and other laser, and it also had another laser reflector, same as Lunar Cod 1. So the Americans went to the moon. They did various experiments, packages. They left packages on the moon that did all sorts of really interesting things, but they didn't have a rover. They were able to move around and do it, but this thing ran for many months. It was a success. It also held until the 2014 the lunar roving record. It went further than any other rover until 2014. In fact, the off-world, my apologies, the off-Earth roving record, beaten by Opportunity, the Mars rover, in 2014. The Soviet Union did build a Lunar Cod 3, but there wasn't any funding to launch it, and they'd ran out of rockets. So it's now sitting in a museum just north of Moscow. However, I will add a little note. The technology and the design was used to help clear debris at Chernobyl. So initially, if you've seen the Chernobyl, you would have seen the guys running out with the shovels. If you've ever seen the drama series that's really good. I mean, the inaccuracy is some of what happens is a bit drama. But you did have the guys dressing up in the rubber suits, rushing out, shoving stuff off a roof and having to run back in again. They used one of these. It lasted for a little while and eventually broke down because of the high amounts of radiation, and then went back to using guys with shovels. Nothing really happened on the moon until 2013. You had flight. When I say nothing, I mean rovers. There was missions orbiting, but we don't care about those in this speech. You want to do, go and Google it like I did. The next one, in 2013, was Chang'e 3. The mission. This one. There he goes. Parked it. Held a rover called U2, Y-U-T-O, translated as Jade Rabbit. There was a lot of very entertaining comedy amongst people in smutty websites about the name. So we won't go into that one. 14th of December 2013, landed. It's the first soft landing since '76. The lander landed, U2 rolled out. I think I've got a picture of U2 here. There you go, there she is. Not huge, cute little thing. Solar powered, as you see. Little antenna which beamed back to Changi 3, and then that sent the signals back to Earth. Its mission was to do China's first soft landing on the moon. It was very successful, and roving around and exploring, as well as the obligatory cameras. They carried ground-penetrating radar to detect structure of the soil and geology down to about 30 meters. First time anybody had done that. And spectroscopes to analyze the chemical composition of the soil. You know, Americans have brought rocks back by then, and they'd analyze them. But you want to have a look around different parts of the moon, which is why you can see the Apollo missions, and then you can see Changi was a little bit further north. It had a good first day. When I say first day, of course, we're talking 2 weeks. 2 weeks. So can you imagine? Yes, you've been paid for a day. Day's wages. It's 2 weeks on the moon. It's going to be fun when they all go to the moon, isn't it? Working 5 days, working a 5-day shift. Okay. However, towards the end of the day, it started having complications. Day 3, and of course, what happens is your lunar rover poodles around for 2 weeks, powered by solar dishes, and then it starts to shut itself down. A lot of them have little heaters inside because it gets down to very low temperatures in the winter or at night. So you then they have a system to shut it down and save power and keep everything a little bit warm and stop everything freezing. And then in the morning, lunar morning, everything wakes up and it goes off and poodles around. Well, that's fine. Day 3, the Chinese controllers found out there was a mechanical failure. It stopped roving. It was working, it was doing everything it was supposed to do, it just didn't move. However, it continued to do science. On the 15th of April in 2014, U2 saw an eclipse of the Earth by the Moon. Sorry, an eclipse of the Sun by the Earth, my apologies. So took images of the Earth passing in front of the Sun, which would have been a much longer, and we see something like that, we call it a lunar eclipse. So, and it finally, this is landed 2014, sorry, finally stopped working in 2016. Still doing science, but couldn't go anywhere. Held the record for setting a record for the longest operational period on the moon, even though it wasn't roving, unfortunately. Next mission, U-22, there he is, landed on the far side of the moon in the 3rd of January 2019.
Pink Floyd.
Yeah, and as everybody who's even vaguely interested in astronomy knows, there's no such thing as the dark side of the moon. It was a Pink Floyd album. Landed on the far side of the moon. The only things we've ever had, the first photographs, I was going to put it up, but I drifted away from it. In 1953, the Russians sent a probe behind and took the first photographs. We now have great detailed photographs because of the Apollo astronauts and all the other lunar orbiters. But nobody had ever landed on the far side of the moon. So U-22 looks quite similar. Landed on the moon. There is a couple of communication satellites which are floating sort of outside, so U-22 can contact and send it back. The Changi 4 lander, so it goes to the Changi 4 lander, which then goes to the satellites and sends it back to Earth. Carried similar instruments to U2, as well as how the solar wind interacts with the lunar surface, because the solar wind is coming off and it's affecting. There's no such thing as unaffected material on the moon. It's all being changed by these high energy ionic winds. And it helps us understand the process of formation of lunar water, and which we'll talk about in a little bit. It's still operating today. Still going today, so it will beat the record for U2 at some point. At the beginning of January this year, it travelled nearly 1,500 kilometres. So it's moving around, it's still doing science. So, then we move to India. The Indians have also been very active. They're the third nation to really get active in rocket launches and things like that, putting satellites up. They're getting close to putting astronauts on a... I know they've sent people to the ISS. I think there's talk of them putting up a space station themselves at some point. 2019, 17th September, the Chandrayaan-2 mission went to the moon, landed, crashed. Consisted of an orbiter, which is still going, and Vikram, which is the lander with the little Pragyan rover inside. Crashed. Happens. Mars, until recently, they estimated about half to two-thirds of all the missions to Mars didn't make it. Often going the wrong way if the Americans forgot to change the negative sign to a positive sign, or the other way around. Or sometimes they have a mixture of feet and meters, things like that. That happens. Failure is not an option, except when it's NASA. So it then, the next one, April the 25th, 2023. So this year, with all this stuff, and you can see this starting to ramp up. The Japanese sent one. Japanese sent a probe, sent a mission called Hakuto-R. Consisted of a small rover, which we will discuss later because they resent it again, and the United Arab Emirates first lunar rover, the Rashid. In fact, I've got a nice picture of some very proud scientists. So it was designed to study the lunar surface, the mobility on the surface, and also had different surface interact with lunar particles. It's basically trying to why the dust is so sticky. If you look at the Apollo astronauts, you look at their suits after a couple of hours, it's black nearly. And that stuff, and if you've ever seen pictures of the lunar dust, it's really spiky. It gets into the fabric. There are a number, all the lunar spacesuits are held by the Smithsonian Institute. A few of them have gone on display. The first ones they cleaned up, but the last one from Apollo 17, they left it. It's as dirty as it was when the astronauts brushed it down before they came back. And for analysis, because they could analyse the dust and see how it affected the materials. Unfortunately, this is also a failure. This one, the Japanese rocket crashed. Well, technically they lost communication with it, but we know it crashed. It turns out the onboard computer thought the altimeter was lying. So it ignored it. It's the reason a lot of these missions have 3 computers and they can check with each other. If one of them's lying, the other 2 hopefully won't. And it kept it hovering 5 kilometres above the lunar surface until it ran out of fuel. Boom! Okay, but India didn't give up. They sent another one. They sent also Pragyan. Obviously, there you go, the little Pragyan probe sitting in the Vikram. They didn't change the name really. It was the Chandrayaan-3 mission this time, and they sent it to here, down at the bottom, near the South Pole. Now the South Pole is getting interesting, and we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. So 23rd of September this year, it landed, and its mission was to show it can drive safely. It's India's first actual landing. They wanted to conduct material experiments on the material to better understand the composition of the moon. It toured around the surface for 2 weeks, a lunar day, and was put into sleep mode. To be honest, they weren't expecting it to survive any longer. They didn't put the heater in to deal with the fact that the temperatures dropped to minus 120 Celsius at night.
Ouch!
Yeah. So now you understand why they put heaters in. And they basically shut everything down and just leave a few bits running that will heat up. It was designed for just a lunar day. And as expected, when they woke it up later in September, no. They spent, being diligent, they spent a week or so. Are you awake? No. You awake? No. So, they didn't get, it did all the stuff they wanted it to do. But no more than that. So it was a successful mission. It was exactly what they wanted. So the lunar South Pole has become very interesting. NASA and other Indian orbiters have been travelling around. Some of them had dropped landers, some of them hadn't, and they've been analysing it. And they've discovered huge amounts of water on the moon as ice, as water ice, in the craters. Now, if you have a look at the moon, the sun comes in, bakes it. But on the poles, you see a lot more shadows in the craters. And some of those craters never see sunlight. And they have discovered that there is ice water in some of these craters. Some of it is, what I'm saying, it's not like you can go skating on it. It's in part of the soil. But it is ice water that you can extract. So 2008, 2009, they discovered direct evidence of this ice water. And they'd use the South Pole because the cratering and the mountains are a lot bigger than the North Pole. So, there you go. So they analysed the infrared and then they discovered that's all water. Again, it's not stuff you can skate on, and you couldn't just go along and go chip, chip, chip in the glass, I'll heat it. It's part of the soil and the regolith. So that's where they're going. NASA is looking at going there. A lot of missions are all heading there now. The South Pole is going to become busy. So where does it come from? We originally think, same as our Earth, a lot of the water probably came from comets and asteroids. That was a subject in one of my talks a few years ago, if I remember rightly. Some of it is chemical reactions, because the oxygen there, when it's affected by the solar winds, can form water through chemical processes. They estimate about 600 billion kilograms of water ice, which turns out to be about 240,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools, or for the internet generation, about 2.4 million bananas. Apparently everything is measured in bananas on the internet now. So this is why a lot of missions are heading that way. NASA, the Artemis 3, if it takes people there, they will be going to the lunar South Pole. There are more rovers planned. Do you remember the failed Hakuto R? Yeah. Well, there's a new one. They're calling it SLIM. This is scientists grappling and modifying the name of their experiment to get a cool acronym. Because it is the Smart Lander for Investigating Moon. I'm not sure if that's modifying the acronym or it's just bad Japanese translation. But SLIM is on its way, and it contains 2 innovative rovers. So it's going to land, it's going to have a lander, and then 2 things are going to pop out. One is, they're called the Lunar Expedition Vehicle, or sorry, the Lunar Exploratory Vehicle, LEV-1, which has a unique hopping device. It's going to bounce. It's not very big. But to be fair, trying to find anything on LEV-1 was a nightmare. Even JAXA, the Japanese Space Agency, didn't have any pictures of it. But it's designed to bounce. The LEV-2 is identical to the one they sent earlier that crashed. And this is it. Oh no, that's...
I was going to say, Gary, you should look to Captain Scarlet because there's a vehicle that actually had done that.
Yes. Well, this one is the size of a tennis ball or a baseball. It's about 250 grams. It was designed by Doshishi Universities, the Sony Group, and Tony, the toy company. The idea being, I think, as well as that, the science, it could be used for toys. So what it is, it's just a ball that pops open, changes its shape, and rolls around. It's got a couple of cameras on. So it's going to beam the cameras back to the LEV-1 or the lander, and then they'll come back. It's just a trial out at this point. It's not designed to do anything more than to take a few pictures, I suspect, and probably won't last more than a lunar day, because there's no way they've got anything in there to keep it warm. By the way, the reason that previous slide, which I've gone out of sequence, when I did this and told Dave what I was going to be doing, he wrote me a blurb, which you've seen in... I went, okay, that's what I'm going to write about then. And it was one of who's going to be the first people on the moon. Well, it's likely to be one of these people. It's going to be two of these. Artemis 3, if it works. Artemis 2 is the one that's going to take 4 astronauts around the moon and come back again. We know there's a white male, a white female, a black guy, and a Canadian. So they've got all the tokens. But Artemis 3, if it goes ahead successfully, is going to land, is going to take 4 people, 2 of them will remain in orbit, 2 of them will land. And this is the crew, this is the group of people they will choose from. These are the astronauts who've been slated to be part of the Artemis program. I don't know who yet, they haven't announced it, they probably haven't designed it. Artemis 2 is due to launch next year. Earliest Artemis 3 will go is 2025. So they'll probably decide after Artemis 2, it could be 2026, it depends. That's assuming it goes right and they don't have to do another mission in between. It's probably one of these people, 2 of these people are going to go to the moon and walk on the moon. They're going to make sure it's somebody who's African American is going to be part of that mission. There's going to be a female. It's likely one of these ladies will be walking on the moon. Especially as there's not much colour diversity there. So I suspect that they will put a lady or an African American on the moon.
Is it likely to be one of the people in the spacesuits?
No. What you'll probably find is some of them have been into space, some of them haven't. The ones in the spacesuits are almost certainly people who've been up to the ISS. Because they'll have a mixture. Because you've got the top left, he's wearing a Russian cosmonauts. They're wearing space. In fact, the guy down on the bottom is wearing cosmonaut suit. The others are wearing the spacesuits they'd wear going out on a spacewalk. The others, some of them probably haven't been into space yet. But they will take some, in that 4, there'll be an experienced person who's probably been in space many times, which will be the mission commander. He's likely to go down, or she's likely to go down.
It's only 2 weeks from retirement.
Yes. Well, 2 weeks from retirement. A day is 12. Is 2 weeks. Remember? So yeah. Well, that's the problem. I do remember there was talk of when because Kennedy said sending a man to the moon, returning him safely, and there was a conversation. Do we have to return them? It would have made life easier if they hadn't returned them.
I think the one at the bottom left is Native American.
It's possible.
Yeah.
I think there will be an element in the choosing of diversity, because NASA are very aware of that, but also experience and skill.
I seem to remember that the reason Kennedy said send to them and return was to squash the USAF because they were insisting that if anyone was going to be in space, it was going to be their people, and if they had to stay on the moon, they would, damn it. And the other services and everyone said, no, you can't leave them on the moon. So only the president of the
Yeah, it was probably because,
bringing them back.
yeah, it was probably because, and that's why NASA got the job rather than the Air Force. So yes, let's go back to LED 2. You might also see this as the SORAQ, which is the original mission name. But in a few years, more missions are going. NASA have another rover ready to, will be launching in the next year or so. Canada have stepped up, are going to do a mission. Probably will launch on a SpaceX or something like that. A lot of these now are launching on SpaceX. It's in development and it's planning going to the South Pole and investigating the ice specifically, the Canadians. So we landed on the moon, eh? Even Australia is working on a mission to go to the moon. Yeah, we're going to go to the moon, mate.
It's going to be called skipping.
Skipping, yeah.
Who has more experience of a barbie on the beach?
Yes, yes. So the moon is going to become very crowded soon. Full of rovers, landers and Americans. So get your passports ready for your visit to the next big McDonald's. Thank you. Any questions?
Gary, you said quite early on in your speech,
Yeah.
I did make a mental note of it, but the moon is moving away.
Yes.
Have they factored in the fact that it's quietly tiptoeing out of our universe whilst
Yes.
no one's noticing?
Yes. And as a result of this, our days are getting longer. Because of the physics, angular momentums and energies and stuff, as it moves further away, our day gets longer. When the moon was first created, they estimate a day on the Earth was about 10 hours. And over the last few billion years, it's slowly moving away. We're now at about 24 hours. As it moves further away, the day will get longer and longer, which means your bosses will make you stay at work longer.
Can you explain to an idiot, why is the moon's position to us making our days longer or shorter?
Yeah, this is embarrassing because there's a physicist in the audience, and
Well, I'm not one.
no, it's all to do with the energy. So there's the angular momentum, which is the angular speed as it goes around, it's a certain amount of energy, and the pull and various. So it's a balance of energies.
So basically, the moon's drag
Yes.
slows us down.
Yes.
So
Eventually, at the moment, the moon is tidally locked.
yeah.
So it's always facing us, and that's due to tidal forces and a thing called tidal heating. We get the tides on Earth in the water. Well, you get them on the Earth as well. The moon has none. So what's happening is the moon is being squeezed in the early days, so it's hot. But as it moves away, slowly that energy disappears, and it reaches a stage where where you're not getting that energy anymore, and the energy is balanced. So we got it faced. Eventually, in a few million, in many millions of years, the Earth and the Moon will be tidally locked. So you will only be able to see the Earth from one side, the Moon from one side of the Earth, and that might be where it stops, because it's all about this energy balances between the movement and the tides. So I don't understand the physics exactly, but I understand it's all about this energy balance. And so slowly, one day, you'll only see it from one side of the Earth, one hemisphere.
And on the flip side, as you mentioned, this also affects things like sea levels, tides,
Yes.
things like the bores.
Yes, eventually we will have no tides. But we are talking many millions of years, so don't worry about it. Unless you're planning on living forever.
Lead to the migration of werewolves to one side.
Yes, yes. Definitely.
The werewolves and the vampires move to the other side.
Yeah. Well, no, the sun's fine. It's just the werewolves need the moon, don't they?
Yeah.
And it potentially means you could have different phases of moons as well. Any more questions?
I've got one question. It's sort of linked, but it's not, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
You'll
I'll
find
fake
out
it,
why.
don't worry.
Yeah, sorry, England and Scotland is slowly tilting after the Ice Age.
Yeah.
So that will also affect the tides and everything else,
Yeah.
the water levels, sea levels and everything else. So
That sort of thing, I think, happens over a shorter time scale.
Yeah.
So more a million years or
But it's a
200,000.
combination of the two
Yeah,
that's
potentially.
creating our...
Yeah. Well, see, I think man is doing a bad enough
Yeah.
job to raise our sea levels without us helping.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
Yes, sir.
Very, sorry, probably not your wheelhouse, but in science fiction, there's often talk about skyhook,
Yes.
to boost rockets up into space. Is there any sort of international cooperation to even consider that?
No, things like that get talked about. There's even been usually things like the Planetary Society or the British Planetary Institute talk about another organ, more science fan talk about that or the space elevator.
Yeah.
No, it would require a massive international. It would require a lot of countries cooperating. Which is doable because we have a lot of science organisations like CERN, which is originally the talk I was going to talk about. 26 countries combine and provide, but you've got to park it on the equator. Because even a skyhook has got to be on the equator. Most of the countries on the equator, not the most politically stable. If you think about it, you've either got to park it in international waters, or you've got to park it in a country like Central America, or Central Africa, or some of the Asian countries. Yeah, they're not the most politically stable countries.
And we don't have anything we can actually build it out of. We do not have any materials.
No, the closest they've come is Buckminster Fullerene and the new carbon stuff.
Yeah, but they made carbon, and we have an oxygen atmosphere, and we have this thing called lightning.
Yes, yes, yeah. The actual science it's great in Arthur C. Clarke and great in science fiction. There's a lot of issues with it. One of my favourites is there's Stephen Kim Stanley Robinson did the whole Mars trilogy, which is great.
Yeah.
Terraforming Mars is a fantastic idea, except one of the reasons that Mars doesn't have any water is because it has a slow gravity. And all the water has escaped. So yes, you can pump water in and pump other gases to make it breathable. That's fine. You'll probably get 100,000 years before it all starts evaporating and you have to pump it all in again. It's a lovely idea. Economically, probably wouldn't happen.
On the flip side of that, one of the ideas that's been bounced around before, and I say you would need an awful lot of cooperation, is it's okay having a space station up there, but people have always banded the idea about, well, we send up the raw components, they build the ships up there.
Building stuff in space is horrendously complicated. If you just building the International Space Station, and that was shipping stuff up and getting them bolted together, took years. Because, yeah, it's a nice idea. But you have men in spacesuits. I've seen them operating. It's fiddly. You've got it. The Science Museum has a thing where you can experience what it's like to do stuff in a spacesuit. You basically put on thick gloves with fingers out there, and you've got to manipulate tiny little things. If you ever look at their tools, they're big hunky stuff because you need that stuff. Plus, they're screwdrivers. If you use a normal electric screwdriver, you put it in, you end up going whiz, 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 because there's no gravity to hold you down. All these things, they say, oh, how can it cost $10,000 for a screwdriver? That's because it's really complicated, because it has to counter that turn. They could do it. It would be very expensive, and at our technology, as things go on, maybe they will. But also, it does require international cooperation. The International Space Station is due to finish in 2030. 2031, it's going to crash back to the Earth. Probably land in the middle of the Pacific, what's left of it. The Russians are talking about pulling out in 2027.
Oh yeah.
It requires the International Space Station. Americans, Canadians, and Russians. A large chunk of it is Russian. Until the SpaceX came in, Russia was the only country that could send astronauts up. And the Americans' relationship with Russia, and consequently our relationship with Russia, is a little bit iffy at the moment.
As I say, that and all the life support systems are Russian.
If you've ever seen, I would highly recommend, if you're interested, go into, there is a tour of the ISS in 4K. And you see the guys, the astronaut goes around, shows the Americans, it's nice and gleamy. And then you reach the section where the American bit is bolted onto the Russian bit. It's a tiny little gap that's filled with pipes that pump all the gases through. And you squeeze through, I'm not sure I could fit through it, looking at it. And then you get into the very Russian. It's all that green, that slightly yellow painted stuff. It looks old-fashioned. The Russians have always made it look old-fashioned. But the International Space Station has been around for a long time. So it's coming to the end of its time. But the Russians are pulling out. Something like a space hook, things like that, require long-term cooperation, and I'm talking decades. Politics doesn't last that long.
Well, if you remember, I mean, even I remember, before the International Space Station, of course, we had the Russian space station, and of course, the recycled lump of a rocket, also known as Skylab.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
With the only thing that survived when it came back down to Earth was the safe.
Yeah, there is an area in the South Pacific, which is the most remote area. That has a lot of spaceships, space debris at the bottom of the ocean. It's very deep. There's no land near it. It's an area near the area of pole of inaccessibility. And occasionally ships, and if something's coming in landing, they radio all the ships in the region and say, get out of there, because something's coming in. So there was a TV series called Dead Like Me, where the hero is killed by, opening episode, is killed by a toilet seat from the Mir space station.
Yeah.
Beautifully done. I loved it. It set off a whole great series, and the irony and the sarcasm was brilliant, except for the fact it was a normal type of toilet seat. And if anybody's ever seen a toilet seat in space, it's not a normal type of toilet seat. It's basically a hole about that big. And they do train astronauts how to do it. They do train. Apparently it's one of the most common questions astronauts get. How do you go to the toilet? Well, they have a toilet with a camera underneath and a monitor there. So you can learn how to position yourself on the toilet seat. It doesn't go out live, apparently. There is an author, Mary Roach, and I'm trying to remember the name of the book. I don't think it was Packing for Mars. I think that was the Dan Campbell one. But she wrote a book all about going into space. She's written a number of very clever books. They're always slightly funny. Look out for her. I think she did one. She actually managed to do one about sex and encouraged her and her husband to have sex inside an NMR or an MRI.
Oh, the vomit comet.
No, the magnetic resonance imaging.
Oh, right.
To see what happened in the body while they're having sex. He must have loved her. It's bad enough persuading people to take slightly erotic photographs to actually have an MRI of it.
Yeah.
But she actually went. She actually went and looked at this thing, and she said that it's a toilet seat and it's about yay big. And apparently the rule is, if you make a mess, you clean it up. If you miss, you clean it up. Nobody else is going to do it for you. So, any more questions?
When the moon is the distance it's going to be?
Yes.
What Armadacons will be going?
Well, I'm planning on being around for it.
Good, I just want
Yeah.
to check.
Armadacon 6 million. Yeah. 600 million, I mean, hopefully. Wasn't supposed to last 35 years!
So it'll be a 3-day con, so that's about 3 months?
Yes, yeah, pretty much by that, yeah. We might do it on the moon, actually, by then. So, any more questions? Any heckles?
There always has to be one.
There always has to be one issue. Okay, what's my timing?
You have
Thank
10
you very
minutes
much,
per
Gary.
Perfect time.